Good evening and welcome to the May 27, 2026 regular Hybrid Planning Commission meeting. I am Chair Thompson. Tonight's Hybrid Planning Commission meeting is being brought to you by Zoom. Welcome to all and thank you for joining us tonight. Commissioners, please have your microphones turned on for the roll call. Deputy Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair. I understand that Commissioner Accuse is absent this evening, so we'll start with Vice Chair Gibson.
Here.
Commissioner Neese.
Here.
Commissioner Perez.
Here.
And Chair Thompson.
Here.
Thank you.
The Planning Commission meets in person and utilizes the Zoom platform for remote participation. I will do my best to recognize commissioners in the order in which the hands are raised. After being recognized, you may then ask your question. Our first item of business is public appearances. This is an opportunity for anyone to speak to the commission about issues of concern, except items requiring a public hearing, any quasi-judicial matters, or campaign-related matters. Staff, is there anyone who has signed up for public appearances as of 4 p.m. today who wishes to address the commission?
Mr. Chair, no one has signed up to speak. Thank you.
All right. The first item of regular business is to review and consider approving the May 13, 2026 special meeting minutes. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There is a motion by Vice Chair Gibson and a second by Commissioner Perez to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion on this item? Staff, please conduct a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Perez.
Aye.
Chair Thompson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gibson.
Aye.
And Commissioner Neese.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes unanimously. The second and final item of regular business is Agenda Bill PCB 26-06, briefing on comprehensive plan consistency amendments, transportation, utilities, and capital facilities. Welcome, Adam Zach, Principal Planner.
It's actually going to be me presenting tonight. So Allison Van Gorp, Deputy Director for Community Planning and Development, for the record. Adam and Kim are both online if we have questions for them. So they're here to support us as well. Just give me 1 second here. Okay. All right, I'll go through the presentation here tonight and then happy to take any questions as we go or at the end. I'll kind of pause between each element and see if there's anything pertaining to that element before we move on. So this work here tonight, we're calling the consistency amendments, and these relate to the changes that were made previously in the land use, housing, economic development elements, as well as the station sub-area plan. And we're really looking to capture impacts on the city's infrastructure here. And so behind the scenes, there's been a lot of work that I've been coordinating with our public works team and a series of consultants to analyze potential impacts to transportation, water, sewer, stormwater, and tie updates into these elements related to the potential impacts and additional capital facilities that might be needed to support the growth we're anticipating through the phase 1 implementation of the sub-area plan. These analyses that have been done at this point are just on phase 1. Anything pertaining to phase 2 is going to have to be addressed in a future analysis as part of that work over the course of the next couple of years after this update's completed. Okay, so we'll dive into transportation first. I'll go over kind of the major updates and then I'll dig into some of these in more detail. So this update incorporated all new transportation counts from across the island that were done in mid-April, about a week and a half, 2 weeks after the light rail station opened. So we felt that was good timing to capture kind of some of the early changes in any transportation patterns resulting from the light rail. And then when we look at this in future years, we can compare from those early days to how things are going longer term. And then from those traffic counts, traffic volumes were estimated for 2044 based on the projected growth that we're expecting in that phase one area. And we calculated level of service for each of the intersections that were analyzed. We've also updated the list of transportation improvement projects based on these growth forecasts and also incorporating the transportation improvement project that was just updated by the city, I think last month, and that covers the next 6 years of transportation projects. So those have all been brought into the plan and updated. Some of the older project cost estimates were updated to reflect inflationary cost increases. So that is all up to date. We've also gone through and just done a text edit to reflect the opening of the light rail station and anything else that has changed in the last 3 years. I also wanted to note that just this week, a couple of the maps in the document were updated to address a couple of errors that we noticed in between drafts. And so these new versions I will include in my presentation tonight, and they'll be in the version for the public hearing packet next week. I think it's probably hard to see the differences, but a couple of the circles indicating the level of service at intersections in 2024 were updated to match with the data tables in the document. And then some of these recommended projects, the lines were either extended or changed slightly to be more accurate to the location of the project. Okay, first I wanted to talk a little bit about what level of service is for traffic. I found a helpful little graphic there on the right that shows level of service is rated based on an alphabetical system from A through F. And basically A, B, and C are considered good. Traffic is flowing freely and it's relatively stable. The delay at an intersection would average between 10 and 35 seconds. So if you're, waiting at a stoplight or a stop sign, you might just queue there for a few seconds. And then as you move down into the yellow, orange, and red, those delays increase, upwards to a minute or more. So the way, this transportation planning works is we look at these intersection LOS levels, and if they're getting to that F level, then we should be making improvements to address the traffic flow. And, that could be through adding signals, adding turn lanes, things of that nature to help the traffic move more freely and get that level of service back up into more of the yellow or green area. So kind of interesting from the new traffic counts was that since COVID and the pandemic and folks starting to have more work from home, we've actually seen traffic volumes have decreased and stayed low over the last 5 years. And that kind of counteracts the projected increase in traffic volumes from the additional growth expected in phase one. And on the whole, in combination, those two things kind of wash each other out. And there's only very minor changes in the projected traffic volumes and level of service. So we didn't need to add additional vehicle capacity projects beyond what was already in the plan. So that's good news. I've got a couple maps that help illustrate this. So it's probably a little bit hard to see on the screen, but these are also included in the draft. The one on the left is existing level of service today based on the counts that were done in April. And what you see is almost all of our intersections are in the green, levels A through C, which is great. There's a couple on the south end of Island Crest Way that are not. The intersection at Island Crest and 63rd is at the F level. Actually, this intersection is exempted in the comprehensive plan from level of service. There was a decision by the council, I think many years ago at this point, that they did not want to add lanes or otherwise expand that intersection. There was a desire to keep kind of the more rural feel on the south end and have that continue to be a four-way stop. And that's why it was exempted at that time. There is a project included in the plan to upgrade this intersection in the future with a traffic signal. And likewise, at 68th, just a little bit further south, you can see that currently it's in the yellow, level D in the AM. And then on the right there, you can see the projection for 2044 that intersection, the level of service declines a bit and gets down into the E and D level. And that one also has a signal in the future plan. Likewise, at the north end, you can see there's one intersection that has turned to red with no improvements. And that's right on the on-ramp there onto I-90. And again, there's projects in the plan to address that. So these are the capacity improvements that are planned. They're in the table. There's 3 projects that are needed to maintain the city's level of service standard for 2044. There's a 4th project there for that 53rd and Island Crest intersection, which, like I said, it's not required because that's exempted from the LOS standard, but we've planned for it so that we have the flexibility to build that if it's desired in the future. These 4 projects were already in the 2024 version of the transportation element. There was a 5th project that was in the 2024 version that has now been omitted because it's no longer needed based on the changes in travel patterns. And that was a right turn lane on North Mercer Way and 80th Avenue. Like I mentioned earlier, we did update the full recommended project list and map for the element to include the projects in the new TIP and those changes that I just went over. The 4 capacity projects that I just talked about are shown in purple on this map, and it also shows maintenance and management of existing streets and signals in red, and then bicycle and pedestrian projects in blue. So these are all the projects that are planned over that 20-year planning horizon. In terms of the goals and policies in the transportation element, there was 2 big changes. Most of Goal 11 and all of Goal 13 have been moved into the station sub-area plan. They pertained to the town center, and so they're more appropriate over there. They haven't been amended other than just moving them to the new location. One thing still to come, I wanted to mention that the station sub-area plan will need to be updated to reflect those policies being moved over. And likewise, there's going to be a small addition related to the capital facilities and utilities element. So that updated station sub-area plan will be provided in the packet for next week for the public hearing. All right, I'll pause there. Is there any questions on transportation before we move on to utilities? No? Okay. No? All right, I'll plow ahead. We can always come back to it later on. All right, so in the utilities element, and maybe just a general comment before we dive into this, we did do a similar analysis in the sewer and water systems where we've got, monitors out there in the pipes measuring flow and modeling what's likely to happen with the expected growth for phase 1. However, these were more of a initial preliminary analysis. We weren't able to fully complete that work yet. We're a little lucky in that the Public Works team was already planning to update the water plan and the sewer plan for the city around this time. The water plan is due to be completed by the end of this year, 2026, and the sewer plan is due to be updated in 2028. So we were able to accelerate some of the modeling and analysis for that work to give us initial information about what might be happening in the sewer and water systems with this phase 1 land capacity increase. However, that work is still ongoing. There's refinements being made, and the specific projects that we need to add to the capital improvement plan are still being identified and cost estimated. So we just have rough numbers for that at this point. We're expecting that additional updates in these elements will be required once those plans are completed. We have gone through and made some substantial updates to the utilities element to reflect kind of what we know so far about water, sewer, and stormwater. And when you review the draft, you'll see quite a bit of redlining related to recent capital projects and what we know so far from the analysis that's been done to this point. In terms of the goals and policies, there's several changes. I've broken these out by infrastructure system. So for water, there were fairly substantive amendments to 7 policies and then 3 new policies. And these amendments provide more specificity on future needs, and they also update outdated language. There was some policy language that I think was probably 20 or 30 years old, kind of talking about salmon being listed as an endangered species and things like that that happened many years ago. And we've since had more advanced planning work around that, and we could have a more specific goal. The new policies indicate the need to coordinate planning and capital improvements for phase 2 and continued priorities to maintain service levels and reinvest in maintaining the existing system. For the sewer system, there's no changes proposed to the goals and policies. They will remain the same. And then for stormwater, there was 2 new policies proposed, and these kind of reflected a pivot in policy direction around stormwater. Currently, there is some flexibility around how stormwater requirements are met by development projects. They can either build on-site detention stormwater management systems, or sometimes they can do a fee in lieu where they pay a fee and the city uses that money to construct larger improvements in the system. However, the town center has gotten to a point where the drainage basin is really constrained, and we're not able to make those sort of citywide improvements to address the needs there. And so this policy requires that in the town center and other constrained basins, redevelopment must provide on-site stormwater management, detention, and treatment. So that's kind of our proposed way to deal with stormwater going forward within the town center. That can be further analyzed as part of phase 2. We know that, if there's increased density in the single family areas surrounding town center, that will certainly have big impacts on the stormwater system. And so it makes sense to further analyze that in phase 2. Okay, were there any questions about utilities?
Just regarding the sewer, the no changes, is that due to not having information, or it's saying that we have enough information to know that there's no changes needed?
Yeah, the goals and policies for sewer were fairly general and broad and talk about, maintaining service levels and continuing to upgrade the system as needed and things along those lines. So there just weren't any policy changes needed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, plowing ahead to capital facilities. Oops, I forgot to update the title on this slide. I apologize about that. So again, there's some text amendments in this element to reflect the station subarea plan and updates to the other 2 elements that I just talked about. There's also updates to the capital needs and capital expense forecasts. These are kind of a summary table of the expenses and projects that the city is anticipating will be needed kind of across all of our infrastructure, including the utilities, including city facilities, parks, everything. And so we've updated the areas where we have information about what will be needed. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the water and sewer planning is still ongoing, and we're expecting those plans to be adopted later this year and then in 2028. And so it's likely that we'll need to do some additional capital planning updates at the time those plans are adopted. In terms of goals and policies in this element, there were 2 changes. Policy 1.1 was amended to reflect the need to address existing deficiencies and support planned growth. This policy previously focused more on maintaining the system as it is, and we need to reflect that, there is more growth anticipated that we'll need to support here. And then there's a new policy proposed, number 1.16, and it's related to monitoring and planning for system improvements necessary to maintain service levels and to support the planned growth. So kind of a similar vein there, but just kind of on the monitoring side and the planning side. One thing still to come in the capital facilities element is there's some very large tables near the end of this element called the capital improvement program and the capital facilities forecast. And those detail out all of the projects and facility improvements that will be needed over the 20-year planning horizon. These tables are still kind of under construction, being updated. I think since not all of the projects for sewer and water are known at this time, we may be taking a little alternative approach by providing a more general map of the places where we know projects will be needed, and noting that this plan is going to be updated in the next couple of years with more specific details on those projects and the cost estimates. And again, that information will be provided ahead of the public hearing.
Hi, Alice. I just have, I thought I read in there, if additional capacity is required, it will be the development who will pay for that. Is that correct?
It's a mix. I think to some degree, how that will work and sort of the equation for that still needs to be evaluated, particularly on the sewer side. With water, one of the kind of the factor that is restricting or the factor that's driving the kind of improvements we need is fire flow. So the large flows that are needed to serve as fire hydrants in an emergency. And we know we need to upsize pipes in several places to provide adequate fire flow. And while it may be appropriate in some cases for development to contribute to that, it's also like a major city service and function. And so at least some of the cost will likely be borne by the city. With sewer, I think the issue is more about, it's a similar thing, like we need to upsize pipes in certain areas to make sure there's adequate capacity during like peak flow times, so that there's not backups created. And that is more directly related to the number of households that are served. So it may make sense for more of that to be tied into, development charges, connection charges, or capacity charges. But that's something the city is going to have to further evaluate, particularly as we move into phase 2, because while there's some impacts projected in phase 1, I think it would be a bigger deal in phase 2, since we'd be really upsizing from a single family area to something more dense. And while we haven't analyzed that, we expect there's likely a lot more pipes that will need to be upsized in those areas. All right, kind of following our same process we've been following the last several weeks. Please provide your comments on these 3 elements by the end of the day on Monday, June 1st, and you can email those to Adam Zach, same way you have been. Our next steps list is getting shorter and shorter. We've just got 3 things left. Next week, June 3rd, is our public hearing. And then we'll continue the public hearing the following week on June 10th, when we're expected to finalize the Planning Commission's recommendation. And then that recommendation will be delivered to the City Council on June 16th. And that's all I have.
I just have a scheduling question. Did I see that we're adding a meeting on July 8th?
Yes, that's correct. It's not related to this project. It is related to a comprehensive plan amendment requested by the JCC.
Oh, I see. Okay. And is that a public hearing?
Yes, it will be.
Okay.
On this schedule, we're starting to collect comments and such. At what point do we start actually going through and?
Yeah, so following the public hearing next week, we'll start going through the matrix, and as part of the packet for next week, we'll be providing responses to that and, answers to the questions and comments on proposed amendments and that sort of thing.
So that's in the June meeting or the following
The
meeting?
June 3rd will start,
Okay.
and if we need more time, we'll continue that on June 10th.
Got it. Perfect.
Allison, can you talk a little bit more about phase two upzoning? Help me understand what's being planned. Is it that the area north of I-90?
Yeah, so you'll recall as part of the sub-area plan, we adopted a boundary that includes the area north of I-90. And we also know we'll need to comply with the requirements of HB 1491 by 2019. And so phase two is aimed at achieving that compliance with 1491. However, as you've heard over these last few weeks, there's a number of things that we need to analyze further, dig into further, plan for. So I think there's a lot still to be determined in terms of exactly what the vision is and what we're planning for there. 1491 does have some important things to be aware of, which is we need to have an average density of 3.5 FAR for the station area. And there's also a number of requirements. We need to adopt multifamily tax exemption program. There's restrictions on how much parking we can require. There's a inclusionary zoning requirement, and a number of other things, but those are kind of the high points.
Just a quick question, and it's kind of a general question, but you had mentioned that with capital improvements associated with utilities, that there's certain things in plan, certain things that are already maybe even scheduled. How is that? Understanding that the city won't be in control of development. How is that just generally planned for? Just so that it's a little bit clearer as to when the capital load could potentially impact citizens.
Yeah. So you'll recall that we had the land capacity analysis that looked at the number of housing units and the affordability levels that we expected to be produced from the upzone that we're considering. And from that, we have an estimate of the population growth that could be expected during this 20-year period and the number of new households. We had a pre-existing estimate of the number of jobs that were expected. And from those growth numbers, they plug that into the modeling software and look at, if we have X amount of traffic now or X amount of sewer flow, how much would we expect that to grow with those additional households and jobs?
And are we anticipating it to be linear or backloaded? Or maybe you can't answer, but
I can't answer that very precisely, but my understanding is that it's generally like a linear growth. So obviously that's just a model and probably won't be completely accurate based on the way the development cycle is likely to work in the future.
And then, sorry, just the city obviously needs to be proactive associated with that. What is the typical advancement associated with infrastructure ahead of the growth curve? Just
Yeah,
approximately.
so the capital improvement plan and the transportation improvement plan are each like a 6-year rolling project list that's updated every year. And like I mentioned earlier, the TIP was just adopted. I think the CIP will be adopted soon for this year. And that, we have like the comp plan has a 20-year list of projects, and then the CIP and TIP have a 6-year list of projects. So when things are moved into that front 6-year window, the cost estimates are made more accurate and precise, and those projects are moved more into reality. These are actually going to be budgeted for and are going to happen in the near term. And so that's how the city plans for these types of projects. They first need to make their way into the comp plan, into that 20-year list. And then when we get to, they make it onto the 6-year list when they're nearing time of delivery.
Any further questions? Now, thank you, Allison, by the way. Now we move to other business. Is there a staff report?
I don't have
evening?
anything further. We already went over the schedule.
Okay, thank you. The next meeting is a special meeting scheduled for Wednesday, June 3rd at 6 p.m. There being no other business to come before the Planning Commission, the time is now 6:33 p.m. and the meeting is concluded. As a reminder to commissioners, please stay seated until city staff has terminated the broadcast.